Good. So yeah, good afternoon everybody also on my behalf. So I'm Ilona Mettiäinen and I worked for half a year as Jana's substitute in the spring, and now I continue working in this project. So it's my pleasure to introduce some of the adaptation solutions and best practices that were identified during the in the webinars in the spring. So we've been dealing with largely local and regional adaptation issues. These are kind of sectoral issues based on communities and livelihoods, and what kind of findings have been found there. It's important to see that while the solutions are also very local by nature, so it's also possible to learn from each other and to develop solutions together, as Jana was just saying. So I'm introducing here a selection of good practices, best practices identified or presented in the webinars in the spring. This is of course not a full list of everything because I only have this 10 minutes or so. I will actually start by barriers to adaptation because it seems that it was easier first to identify barriers. What are the things that keep people and communities from adapting? Those include, for instance, the lack of knowledge on climate change and its impacts in the first place. And secondly, what could be done in order to adapt to these changes? Also, very often adaptation is reactive instead of proactive. You only adapt when you have a situation at hand, not beforehand, and that is a problem. Maybe you can see slightly red text on the right-hand lower corner. This was an interesting idea. Being adaptive by culture in many Arctic regions is both a good and a bad thing, because you may think that you are able to adapt if you are able to adapt to gradually increasing changes, but there may be a point after which you just can't adapt without having a proper plan for that. Well, as a starting point for being able to adapt, you need to know what you need to adapt to. So here's a collection of a few ideas on how awareness could be improved. For instance, a course on climate is one of those. And also, since there's plenty of research available, those results should be disseminated in layman's language so that it's better accessible for people. Also, participatory methods and citizen science were mentioned in these. And climate services, they can help different industries, administration, communities, so on, to adapt to climate change for making informed decisions. And here I highlight a few climate services that were introduced in these webinars. So the one on the left-hand side serves fisheries, by predicting where the fish stocks are located. The middle one is about producing future scenarios for Yamal for 2040, and the right-hand side is a climate service for giving forecasts on snowmaking conditions. Modern-day solutions were, of course, also mentioned. Some of these have been influenced, I think, by the fact that we held the webinars in the middle of a pandemic. So a lot of virtual solutions, virtual tourism, telecommunications, those were mentioned. You don't actually have to go to a place, but you can participate online. But also some map-based solutions for engaging citizens or for informing people were mentioned. And let me show you here a couple of examples. This ArcGIS-based solution is actually currently not publicly available, but it was presented to us in the webinar with Alaska. So here's a map that tells what kind of climate-related plans there are available in Alaska. So I think that this would be a very useful tool also for us here in Finland. Another very interesting interesting online tool is the LEO network. So it's possible to join to be a member and to submit some observations or news articles and like that. So here it's just a map of Northern America, but there's basically throughout at least the Northern Hemisphere, there's lots of posts, even from Northern Scandinavia. If we go further to livelihood-specific aspects, so reindeer herding was one issue that was discussed. It was said that the main adaptation in reindeer herding to bad winters in favorable snow conditions is supplementary feeding that started already in 1970s or 80s. In addition to that, I'll also introduce you something that was mentioned in the discussions. So renoducts in Sweden. So of course it's like it's a merging of the word reindeer and aqueduct. So these are ways for reindeer to safely cross railways and motorways in search for food on larger areas. So this has been also introduced in The Guardian. Food security was also discussed rather widely. It was talked about in the context of aquaculture, in the context of agriculture and farming and gardening. So there's been a lot of initiatives to improve food security in the Arctic by expanding farming and gardening and by well, of course, reindeer-related issues, by aquaculture, both on land and in the seas. So many different kinds of initiatives. I will here highlight one example by it was introduced by Megan Wilson from University of Toronto on Fort Albany First Nations community garden that has improved food security in Arctic Canada. We also learned about some forestry-related adaptation practices, including new types of products like co-foam and bio-based fuels and like that. I found it also really interesting to hear that in some places it's timber is protected, like covered by snow, in order to avoid attacks of lots of beetles from the timber. Some of the issues discussed were related to governance issues. On the grey color, you can see some problems. I already mentioned some of these: lack of adaptation plans and only having reactive adaptation. There are some good examples that were mentioned in the presentations of our webinars. For instance, the successful suggestion to create a Sami panel on climate change, and I believe that Clemette will be talking about this issue later on today. There are also like some EU-related aspects, and Russia has a national adaptation strategy that requires regional and sectoral strategies to be developed this year and next. And Jana already mentioned about the report produced also as commissioned by this report and another one. So there's information about that. But let me show here a successful concept produced by Climefish project. It's a Horizon 2020 project. So they've created this international standard guidelines for creating climate adaptation plans for fisheries and aquaculture. So this has been successfully implemented, for instance, in Greece. So also outside of the region. And I will just quickly show the, this is the report that I mentioned and Jana also introduced. Here's the link to the publication, and I just checked, and today it was downloaded almost 150 times, so it's been very popular. Just to say that there's a chapter on good practices, and so the full report is available online, and on our website you can find also the presentation slides by Kati Berninger, who is one of the authors of this report. Doing things together was, it was widely agreed that this is a good thing in adaptation, learning from others and doing together, either so that scientists and communities work together or people work together as communities. So there are these different cooperative ideas, different citizen science initiatives, and different approaches that make climate predictions meaningful through knowledge co-production. So doing things together make things easier. And also, sharing best practices across the Arctic and beyond was seen as a good thing. The thing is that this is work very much let's say in early stages. There are communities that don't know what they are supposed to be adapting to. There's need for knowledge. There's also a need for sharing of good practices. While there are, of course, regional differences depending on the livelihood structures and the other, like, let's say, infrastructure or education level and level of resources. So many solutions can actually be learned from and applied. So I'll just finish by mentioning that information about all of the webinars is available on our website. You can see the address in there, and also on our Twitter account, ACAF Finland, you can find lots of tweets about these issues. Thank you.